Let's go on a little bit more, shall we? Always learn in honor of my brother, Theodore Jason Ben Homer Doler. Also, my brother-in-law, Richard Allen Ben Richard Allen. Thank you for subscribing. If the notifications, feel free to turn those as we listen and record and learn at different times of the day, and we're in a different time zone than you. And ultimately, honor my wife this evening, who is allowing me the benefit to be able to come to you. Let's make a quick thrust here in Talmudic Intricacy and its spiritual counterpart to see if we can get through this problematic Talmudic passage. It's the Mishnah that states in Bava Metzia 93a and Shavuos 49a. There are four categories of watchmen. We have the paid watchman, a borrower, a paid watchman, and a renter. Okay. An unpaid watchman may absolve himself of liability by taking an oath in all instances of loss. A borrower must reimburse the owner in all instances of loss. A paid watchman and a renter may both absolve themselves of liability by taking an oath if the entrusted object or animal is broken or injured, captured or dies, but they must reimburse the owner if it is lost or stolen. The Gemara discusses that teaching. Who is the sage who taught that there are four categories of watchmen? Rav Nachman says it is Rabbi Meir. Rav said to Rav Nachman, is there any sage who does not accept the premise that there are four categories of watchmen, i.e., we are forced to say that we find four categories of watchmen, according to Rashi? One who is unpaid, one who is paid, one who is a borrower, and one who is a renter. Rav Nachman responded to him, this is what I am saying to you. Who is the sage who maintains that the laws pertaining to a renter are the same as those pertaining to a paid watchman? It is Rabbi Meir. He maintains that a renter must pay whenever a paid watchman is required to. The words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable for you, Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. We continue on page 338. The Gemara questions, if so, why does the Mishnah mention four categories? There are only three. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak responded, there are four categories of watchmen who are governed by three sets of laws. Clarification is necessary. The simple meaning of Rav Nachman's words, this is what I am saying to you, implies that by saying, who is the sage who maintains that the laws pertaining to a renter resemble those pertaining to a paid watchman? It is Rabbi Meir. Rav Nachman did not retract his original statement. Who is the sage who taught that there are four categories of watchmen? Instead, he was explaining the intent of the rhetorical question he originally asked. This is what I am saying to you means that the question, who is the sage who maintains that the laws pertaining to a renter resemble those pertaining to a paid watchman, is not a new and different question, but an explanation of his original sage who taught that there are four categories of watchmen. That question is answered as it was originally. It is Rabbi Meir. On the surface, clarification is needed regarding the above explanation of these two questions. From the assertion and the explanation of his question given by Rav Nachman, the laws pertaining to a renter resemble those pertaining to a paid watchman, i.e., there isn't a separate category of laws governing a renter. It appears that there are three categories of watchmen. In his first question, however, Rav Nachman asked, who is the sage who taught that there are four categories of watchmen? The apparent contradiction between Rav Nachman's explanation of his question and the itself is evident from the fact that the Gemara asks immediately after Rav Nachman's explanation. If so, why does this Mishnah mention four categories? There are only three. It's saying that the wording the Gemara uses also requires some clarification after initially questioning, is there any sage who does not accept that there are four categories of watchmen? Which means, as Rashi comments, we are forced to say that we find four categories of watchmen. How is it appropriate to continue and say there are only three because there are only three sets of laws? Delineating a renter's obligation. Number two, it is possible to offer the following explanation. Rashi clarifies in Bava Metzia 80b. the reason for the difference of opinion between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda regarding whether a renter is governed by the laws pertaining to an unpaid watchman or a paid watchman. He states that the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda, who maintains that a renter is judged like an unpaid watchman, is based on the logic that he pays a fee for working with the object and he does not receive any payment for the taking care of the object. The intent is that although a renter benefits from the use of the benefit is not viewed as a wage that causes him to be considered a paid watchman. The benefit he receives does not come as payment for taking care of the object. Rather, he pays a fee for working with it. Hence, since he does not receive payment for taking care of the object, Rabbi Yehuda considers him as an unpaid watchman. The reasoning of Rabbi Meir, who maintains that a renter is considered a paid watchman, is based on the logic that since the entrusted object is in his possession for his benefit, even though he pays a fee for working with it, he is considered as a paid watchman. Were he not to pay a fee, he would be considered as a borrower and would be liable even if the entrusted object was destroyed due to the circumstances beyond his control. Since he does pay a fee, he is not considered a borrower but a paid watchman. Rashi's wording implies that, according to Rabbi Meir, fundamentally a renter should be governed by the laws pertaining to a borrower. Nevertheless, since he does pay a fee, he is not considered a borrower, but as a paid watchman. The intent is that Rabbi Meir does not consider the renter's obligation to take care of the entrusted object as a further payment in addition to the fee he pays for benefiting from the object. Were that to be true, the benefit from the object would be considered as payment for taking care of it, and he would therefore be considered a paid watchman for that reason. Instead, the entire reason for the renter's liability is that the entrusted object is in his possession for his benefit, and this he resembles a borrower. Nevertheless, since he does pay a fee, he is not actually considered a borrower, but merely a paid watchman. To explain the issue, there's a fundamental difference between the basis for obligations of both unpaid and paid watchmen and those of a borrower. A watchman is one who, as indicated by the meaning of the term, accepts responsibility and obligates himself to take care of another person's object until he returns it to that person intact. The obligation of unpaid watchmen and a paid watchman are not the same. Since a paid watchman receives payment for taking care of the entrusted object, he is obligated to guard it more scrupulously, guarding not only against negligence, but also against the object being stolen and him losing it. By contrast, since an unpaid watchman does not receive payment for taking care of the entrusted object, it is sufficient that he guard it less diligently. Hence, he is not liable for theft and loss. However, they share this common factor. Their obligation stems from the commitment they made. In comparison, a borrower's obligation does not stem only from his commitment to watch the object belonging to the lender. Instead, it is as if he acquired the object entirely and is obligated to return it. It is like a loan. Since the benefit is entirely his, he acquires the object and that he becomes liable even if it is destroyed due to circumstances beyond his control, even though a person cannot guard against such situations and they are not included in the obligations of a watchman. This is Rashi's intent in explaining Rabbi Meir's opinion that the obligations of a renter are the same as those of a paid watchman, since the entrusted object is in his possession for his benefit. According to this approach, the basis for the renter's obligation is not that he accepted an obligation to guard the object, but rather that the entrusted object is in his possession and it is there, not for the sake of him guarding the object on behalf of its owner, but for his own sake, so that he can use and benefit from it. And this he resembles a borrower. Nevertheless, since the renter does not pay a fee, he is not considered a borrower, but a paid watchman. The fact that the benefit is not entirely his, for he pays for the benefit he receives, reduces and lessens his obligation from that of a borrower. Hence, he is not considered a borrower, but a paid watchman. Paying the fee lessens the obligations that the renter would inherently have were he a borrower. removing his liability for loss due to circumstances beyond his control. Hence, he remains liable only for theft or loss, like a paid watchman. Thus, a renter is an intermediate category between a paid watchman and a borrower. Regarding the fundamental definition and nature of this obligation, he is a borrower since the object is in his possession for his benefit. Nevertheless, regarding the extent of his obligation and the laws that apply to him, he is a paid watchman because the owner of the object receives benefit from the renter's having the object in his possession. How are the categories of watchmen defined? Number three, on this basis, the question regarding the Talmudic passage mentioned in section 1 can be fully understood. The question, who is the sage who taught that there are 4 categories of watchmen, stems from the fact that the Mishnah mentions a specific number of watchmen, stating there are 4 categories of watchmen. Whenever a number is specified in a Mishnah, there is inference to be derived from that fact. Hence, when discussing such Mishnayos, the Talmud frequently asks, such as Carisas to be, and the source is mentioned there. Why is the number mentioned accordingly? Rav Nachman concludes that the division into 4 categories of watchmen is not merely an external matter, that in practice there are 4 ways an entrusted object can be found in the possession of a watchman, as Rashi states in Shavuos. 1 is an unpaid watchman, another a paid watchman, the third a borrower, fourth a renter. Instead, the 4 categories are also of a fundamentally distinct nature. This is the intent of Rav Nachman's question, who is the sage who taught that there are 4 categories of watchmen, and of his answer, it is Rabbi Meir. Only according to Rabbi Meir, who maintains that a renter's liability is that of a paid watchman, can it be said that there are 4 fundamentally distinct categories of watchmen? According to Rabbi Yehuda, who maintains that a renter's liability is that of an unpaid watchman, it is true that, in actual fact, a renter who pays a fee does not resemble an unpaid watchman, as mentioned above. Nevertheless, with regard to the obligation to care for the entrusted object, incumbent on the renter as a watchman, the renter is exactly the same as an unpaid watchman because he does not receive a fee for taking care of the object. Therefore, there are only 3 types of categories of watchmen, not 4. By contrast, according to Rabbi Meir, who maintains that a renter's liability is that of a paid watchman, the intent is not that the definition of and rationale for the renter's liability is the same as that of a paid watchman. Instead, it is only that in actual practice he is governed by the laws applying to a paid watchman, i.e., it is only the extent of his liability that resembles that of a paid watchman. However, the nature of his obligation resembles that of a borrower. Therefore, it is appropriate as a distinct type of watchman. As such, to admit that there are not 3 but 4 categories of watchmen. This is the intent of Rabbi Nachman's response when Rava asked him, is there any sage who does not accept that there are 4 categories of watchmen? Rava's conception was that the division into 4 categories of watchmen referred to the actual ways in which a person becomes a watchman. And hence he states we find the Mishnah explicitly mentioned that there are 4 categories of watchmen. Rav Nachman responded to him, this is what I'm saying to you. My intent in asking who is the sage who taught that there are 4 categories of watchmen and answering it as Rabbi Meir is to point out that the emphasis of the Mishnah, there are 4 categories of watchmen, i.e. that fundamentally the statement that there are 4 intrinsically distinct categories of watchmen apply only according to the understanding of Rabbi Meir, who maintains that a renter is governed by the laws governing a paid watchman, as explained above. This is also the intent of the Gemara's give and take at the conclusion of the passage. If so, why does the Mishnah mention 4 categories? There are only 3. There are 4 categories of watchmen who are governed by 3 sets of laws. According to this approach of the sage who questions Rav Nachman's reasoning, there is an implied contradiction if a renter and a paid watchman differ not only in the actual way in which they incur the responsibilities of a watchman, but also in the fundamental definition of their obligation. How is it that they share the same liability? Since there is no difference in the extent of their liability, we're forced to say that there are fundamentally not only regarding their obligations, only 3. intrinsically distinct categories of watchmen. To this, the Talmud answers there are four categories of watchmen who are governed by three sets of laws. The fundamental characteristics of a paid watchman and a renter are different. Thus, there are four distinct categories of watchmen, each one with fundamentally unique characteristics. Nevertheless, as explained above, they are divided into three groups with regards to the laws governing their liability. A spiritual counterpart. Number four, the above explanation that there are four categories of watchmen who are governed by three sets of laws is based on the understanding that a paid watchman and a renter differ in the fundamental nature of the obligation that they undertook to care for the owner's object. Therefore, there are four categories of watchmen. However, regarding the laws governing liability, a renter is liable to the same extent as a paid watchman. Therefore, they are only governed by three sets of laws. It's possible to say that the above explanation relates to the spiritual counterpart of the four categories of watchmen in our divine service. uh, Concept of seeking a spiritual counterpart for the mitzvahs is reflected in the words of Rambam, who writes at the conclusion of Hilkos Tamora, the majority of the Torah's laws are nothing other than counsels given from afar from he who is of great counsel to improve one's character and make one's conduct upright. From this statement, it is understood that in addition to its straightforward meaning, every one of the Torah's laws has a counterpart in man's service to his creator, as explained in many sources. As Shelah states, just as there exists four categories of watchmen in relationships between man and man, so too there exist four similar categories in a relationship between man and the omnipresent. Blessed is he. To explain this concept, as is well known, Shabbos 88a, also in Zohar, Volume 2, page 161, the existence of the world is dependent on the Jews' observance of the Torah and its mitzvos. Thus, the Jews are watchmen, as it were, in whose care God entrusted his world. This parallels the charge God gave Adam, the first man, whom he placed in the Garden of Eden, and commanded to till it and care for it, according to the book of Genesis, 2nd chapter, 15th verse, Bereshit. Similarly, the Jews are to care for the world through their observance of the Torah and its mitzvahs. According to a straightforward understanding, the four categories of watchmen are divided into three general groupings with regard to the way a watchman relates to the entrusted object and its owner. A, in the instance of an unpaid watchman, all the benefit for his caring for the entrusted object is the owner's. The watchman does not benefit from caring for the object at all, for he does not profit from doing so. He acts solely for the benefit of the owner. B, a borrower derives the entire benefit from the object. The owner does not receive any benefit from it while it is in the domain of the borrower. C, a paid watchman and a renter are linked in one group because they share a common denominator. In each of these instances, both the owner and the watchman derive benefit. In the instance of a paid watchman, the owner benefits from having his object guarded in a superior manner, and the watchman benefits from the fee he receives for his effort. With regard to a rent, he benefits from the use of the owner's object, and the owner benefits from the rental fee he receives in return. According to this, it is possible to explain the definition of the four categories of watchmen and the relationship between man and the omnipresent. Blessed be he, as Shelah states. An unpaid watchman represents the loftiest category, one who acts without the intent to receive a reward at all. He watches for God's sake alone. To elaborate using the wording of Rambam in Hilkos Teshuvah 10:2, it's Rambam is saying that this is the level of Abraham, our patriarch, and it says that Abraham was an unpaid watchman, as reflected in the verse. He kept my watch, i.e., my watch, and not his watch. He served only for God's sake, not for his own sake. He serves God out of love for no ulterior motive, acquire benefit, not even to receive a share in the world to come. Rather, he does what is true because it is true, serving God because he is the master and is befitting to serve him. A paid watchman serves in order to receive a reward. Similarly, a renter is like one who says, I'm giving this silah to tzedakah so that my son will live, i.e., he also seeks to derive personal benefit from his service. And a borrower, all the benefit is his. He does not believe that God metes out reward and punishment. As Shelah explains, this category refers to the wicked who are not at all involved in divine service. I guess we'll do part 2. We'll come back and pick up at page 348 at number 5, looking at a borrower generously. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. I'm Yisrael Boykin in Phoenix, Arizona, 602-338-0129. God be with you.